Can you stick to me?
I hear you. Well, no, what he's asking where are the resources so I can look this up. And so I'm trying to think. Dr. John Abrams is the scientist that did the challenge. And he and I and another individual named Dr. John Toleran have been doing presentations in other countries to help the doctors in other countries understand how to look at cannabis in a really simple manner that's accurate. The Ganjier uses this categorization system as the system so you can look at cannabis in a really clear, easy manner. And so you could look up the Ganjier, and I think Weed World we did a comprehensive article in Weed World magazine a couple years back that covered this. Because let me go a little deeper too. So when I talked about like florals terpene driven, esters are fruit driven. So esters are another molecular compound, but from the ester compound you get more your fruit scents. And so when we're talking fruit, you're saying, it's limonene. But the thing is, if I just tweak a minor, I can make the majors really move. And so what we have is volatile compounds that aren't being measured by the lab.
Yeah.
And so you're having to kind of pretend that they're not there, but we know they're there, right? Yeah. And so what you're having have happen is that anything that's to do with the COA, just throw it away because it's not accurate. And what you're having to understand is that thiols are really producing your fuels. And volatile sulfurs is what's creating this olfactory direction, and only that floral category is really terpene driven. And so why do plants produce these metabolites to protect? But why are they different? Because plants that live in the high deserts don't have bees, and so even though pollination is typically wind driven, cannabis always has a backup plan, like all plants do. And so what do you attract if you're in the desert? Dung beetles. So what do you have to smell like? Shit. And so what is a terpene that's pretty interesting to me? Cadaverine. And so I like, cadaverine and putrescine. So those are pretty disgusting. But they're the ones that really help drive some of this movement of insects to cannabis to assist in pollination that cannabis wants to have as an insurance policy. Where do you get higher volatility? In plants that have further space between them. So if I grow in a desert, I always have a louder, more noxious cannabis plant because I have a further distance for the volatiles to travel to attract or repel. But if I'm in an area that has more tropical, then I have a far closer proximity, so I shouldn't have the same level of volatility. Right. And so when you kind of just take a look at how these things interrelate, and you can take a look at like limonene and pinene as these directions of how we determine if it's like a sativa or an indica, because it doesn't mean that all the other things are not there. It's just that that's a pretty clear indicator of direction as a major. We can look at myrcene as a stress indicator. So when we see high myrcene levels, we know the plant was stressed. Is that a bad thing? No. But if we want to drive that heavy sedative narcotic effect, you have to add stress to get the myrcene levels to jump. Farms that produce lower myrcene levels have less of a smack you in the mouth kind of high. My farm produces ultra high levels of it, and so I kind of have to produce that type of product. But it's an understanding of how do we look at some indicators that help us see direction, and then how do we take the information and communicate it. And so Weed World, Ganjier, Dr. John Abrams, get you moving. Okay, anybody else?
I got a question.
Yeah.
You were saying the different categories, THC levels, I think the numbers were moving up through the categories?
Yeah, yes. His question was, you notice that there's patterns in cannabinoid levels with categorization levels, or the four categories. And yes, I do. And what helped me out a lot was that I was involved in cannabis when the labs first came out. And we helped the lab really develop as a lab by doing a lot of work and bringing a lot of work. And what happened was you end up having great relationships with labs, and you're able to get really good pricing on testing. So I could test rivers of shit at cost, and we were the largest lab drop-off in the entire region, so it let me see everybody's COA. So when you're seeing thousands of COAs coming through your hands, you kind of, and I'm somebody that sees patterns well. Like, I see repetitive patterns well. And so when I look at stuff, when I look at data, the pattern always clearly pops out to me. And so what I started to realize was we never see fruit over these levels, very rare. Wow, florals are where the numbers are high too, but earths and fruits always historically lower. And so earth is, to me, always lowest. And if we want to increase an earth and make it more marketable, we have to add fuel, and then we have to go through the population to find the one that carried the higher cannabinoids, but the earth profile. So what it comes down to is selection. And so you have to say, okay, if I want fruit to get into the system, I can take a fruit and a floral and put it together, and then I would drive my numbers up to a 21, and now I can go find the one that's 21 that still tastes like fruit. And so fuel is always where the numbers are insane. And that's where the work went in, because what you had was lab-driven, data-driven breeding. And so we all realized that if it wasn't 25, it wouldn't sell. Well, I said, well, fuck it, better be 35 then, because I needed to move. And so right now you're looking at COAs that are insane, but the truth of it is that you very well could have a 40% cannabinoid THC level, but you're devoid of a lot of other things, because in the molecular basket, only so much weight can be added. So I can only have so much, but if I remove a ton of other shit, I can have high spikes. It doesn't mean I'm getting a better effect. It doesn't mean I'm having a longer high. It's because I'm going so far out of range that I'm pulling balance out. And so I'd say like stuff like in the low 30s is where you can still have low 30s, almost 5% on your volatiles that you can measure. And so that's a pretty good range.
Right.
But the fact of it is that naturally, if you leave populations alone, any population, they revert to a 1-to-1, right? So if I just let cannabis naturally pollinate, it goes to 1-to-1. And if I allow it to sit on its own and I steer it a little bit, it seems like, 13, 15, 16 fruits, 11, 10, 12, 14 earths, 22 to 26 floral. Sky's a fucking limit on gas.
What is this guy?
Well, shit, man, I got a Medellin cut, and the Medellin it's through, Medellin is done by, I want to say, Lemonade, but I provided one of the plants in the breeding project 10 years ago that made it. And so it's loaded with stuff that's like really high cannabinoid, but the Medellin and the Blanco both test at multiple labs, multiple times, 39%. It's hard not to sell that kind of stuff. People buy it. And actually, the Medellin and the Blanco are actually really good gas cuts. And so if you smoke it and you grow it right, it's really good pot. But those numbers ring the bell. And so what we do is we okay, we want more fruit, so let's throw some fruit on the Medellin, and maybe some of those cannabinoids will drag that stuff into it, and then I can bring it into another direction. The market doesn't understand, and we screwed ourselves. We became little petty scientists too. And we started using little numbers and indicators like they actually had value, and it bit us in the ass because we became THC obsessed, and now it's not the selling point that we thought it was, because it completely truncates the population of plants you can use. But lo and behold, we all used it. And we still use it. But it's just important to understand how those numbers are connected to categories. And there's outliers. There's always outliers, just like people. But in general, this shit is pretty accurate. And we know it's clearly, definitively 4, but in my interpretation of cannabinoids, my interpretation